Thank you very much, Pak Ricky. Wonderful to receive such insights on the progress of Indonesia and the work of PLN. We now proceed to our second panel discussion of the afternoon. In this discussion, we're going to learn about green hydrogen and green ammonia. We're going to hear about recent breakthroughs that showcase our region's leadership. Joining us for this panel, I will read out the names if you could join me up on stage. We have Dr. Andrew Benedek, founder of Anaergia. We have Kenneth Kong, AVP and Senior Managing Director for APAC, looking after infrastructure advisory at Black & Veatch. We have Yosuke Onishi, Head of Green Shipping Desk at ITOCHU Corporation, and Nikunj Panchal, Global Vice President, Energy Infrastructure Transition at Ricardo. The moderator for this discussion is Lim Wen, Partner for Infrastructure Advisory at KPMG in Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, as our panelists join me on stage, can I please remind you again to ask any questions you have for the panel via the Q&A function on the ACES app. Do submit your questions and the panelists will get to you after their discussion.
It's the least I can do.
Lim, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon all. Hi, my name is Wen Bin, KPMG, partner with KPMG that look after energy transition and decarbonization. I'll introduce the panel a little bit and then we'll pass it to the panelists. So we have a good panel, good mix of industry practitioners, economic advisors, as well as technical advisors that are actively engaged in the topic of green hydrogen on a day-to-day basis. So in this topic, shaping Asia-Pacific green hydrogen ammonia leadership, we will explore a few topics around economics of hydrogen, economics of low carbon fuel, and take a look a bit about examples that has happened in the real life. And we will then sort of look into partnerships, collaborations, what Asia needs to do to continue to drive and shape a leadership around the green sector. So I'll pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Maybe Andrew can start with you.
Thank you very much, Van Bin. I'm Andrew Benedek. I'm a founder and until recently CEO of Anaergia. Anaergia is one of the world's largest global system suppliers and operators for creating bioenergy, in particular biomethane or renewable natural gas. We've had limited involvement with hydrogen, a couple of interesting examples that may or may not be of interest.
Great. Ken?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kenneth Kong. I'm the Associate Vice President and Senior Managing Director for Black & Veatch's Infrastructure Advisory business, and I cover Asia Pacific. Black & Veatch is actually a global engineering, consulting and construction company. We are about 13,000 people globally, based in the US. And our experience in green hydrogen, or actually hydrogen more generally, we've completed roughly 200 FEL studies, as well as we've actually constructed a number of green or low carbon hydrogen plants globally, which I'll share later on. Thank you.
Onishi-san?
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, this is Onishi from ITOCHU Corporation, which is Japanese trading and investment firm. And I myself came from Marine Department, dealing with international shipping. So for this context, we would like to have a team to change our fuel, currently heavy fuel oil, into ammonia. And for this purpose, we would like to create entire supply chain, not only ammonia fuel vessel, but also bunkering hub and clean ammonia production to make chain. That is a concept for our project, and I'm happy to introduce more if we have a chance. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Nikunj.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nikunj Panchal. I'm the Global Vice President for Ricardo, which is an energy and environment consulting firm. Personally, I've been advising many customers, public sectors and corporates on green hydrogen projects globally, in Australia and in Asia, as well as overseas in Europe and Americas. and gathered quite a lot of learnings from those projects as to why the projects succeed and where are the bottlenecks and challenges. So looking forward to, of course, share some of the insights today. Ricardo, as a firm, we specialize in a policy strategy and a concepts and feasibility kind of a consulting in the sustainability and energy transition space.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us, panelists. So on the topic of hydrogen, it is such a great promise when it first comes to light in the world, right? Harnessing one of the world's most abundant resource and turning into a form of energy that can then be sustainable and utilize the power of everyday life. And we're going through a journey of discovering, looking for projects, studying the visibility, and then bumping into supply chain issues and then going to policy discussions. Now, what have you learned in the last 5 years of journey through the hypes and in the journey of sustainability? And perhaps we first start with the question of economics, right? So question to the panelists here, where have we seen projects that are more viable when it comes to low carbon hydrogen or low carbon ammonia? And perhaps Onishi-san from ITOCHU can shed some light with us on this.
It's a bit difficult, but still, if we would like to change heavy fuel oil into something alternative fuels, that is definitely expensive than conventional fuels. That is unavoidable. But as I mentioned, we would like to create new entire supply chain using ammonia for maritime fuel. Then, in any case, each sector we need fast penguins or fast movers. We would like to be one of the fast movers. So we are now constructing world's first ammonia bunker vessel for refueling, for creating Singapore as the first ammonia bunkering hub. And this vessel is only 5,000 cubic. Maybe that is the smallest size as realistically, because the first batch of ammonia fueled vessel we expect that is a large size bulk carrier. Together with the 5,000 cubic, 6,000 cubic ammonia fuel tank. So the minimum size of the bunker vessel shall be 5,000. So we cannot make a big investment for the first step, but we can minimize what is the smallest size to make a first step. That is one example. And another one is we would like to produce clean ammonia in Indonesia first. As Ricky-san mentioned, Indonesia also create clean energies, renewable energies. So we are now collaborating with Pupuk Indonesia and Toyo Engineering Japan to produce green ammonia using existing ammonia fertilizer plant. That is one way to reduce our initial cost. Yeah, so that we can create it. Yeah.
Right, there are quite a lot of good points there, right? So Onishi-san covered about taking leadership position, taking a first step, first mover advantage, and obviously as a first mover, there are risks involved, right? So we would not be thinking about big projects, but we should think about how do we do the minimum scale, minimum size, bite size, we're comfortable with, and get it to exposure and take a view of the market around green ammonia demand, right? That's quite critical in taking a leadership and first mover and capturing that first mover advantage and doing small projects. So there are quite a lot of points. I think thanks for that. Nikunj, how about from your perspective, being involved in the various projects and analysis and with project sponsors, what do you see are projects that are closer to commercial viability and easier low hanging fruit?
Yeah, thank you, Vivin. For the ammonia, and I'm sure everyone in the room kind of knows about the statistics, but green ammonia, when we started kind of initial 2-3 years, when we started looking at initial phases of studies for a few projects, it was kind of trading between $1,000 to $1,200 per ton, kind of an ammonia pricing, green ammonia pricing I'm talking about, compared to the gray ammonia, which is $250 to $300, which is a massive, massive delta, and then who's going to pay that premium, right? We've seen kind of a trajectory has declined over a period of time. We now see there are certain countries because of natural resources advantage, supply chain advantage, or economy of scale. The pricing claimed these days is kind of coming down to $750, but there is still a premium, right? But still, there are many projects which are not going ahead in the FID, and the successful projects have done a different strategy. So what are the challenges that we have come across? I would say, first and foremost, is the power transmission infrastructure, grid connections. Those are the biggest bottleneck we've experienced. When we talk about the commercial scale green hydrogen, green ammonia projects, they require 500 megawatts to gigawatts kind of scale power consumption for a single project. And often in terms of existing infrastructure is not sufficient to take up that load. So that becomes a bottleneck. When we talk about the capital outlay, of course, as I said, the price of ammonia, green ammonia comes up very high. And that's purely because the existing infrastructure is again not good enough. We have to have the new infrastructure come in place, whether it's in a transmission, export-oriented infrastructure, or even the plant BOP. So that becomes another bottleneck. And then, of course, the regulations is another kind of aspect. So when it comes to projects, we have been successful in translating lower green ammonia price. I would say they have adopted a strategy of utilizing the existing facilities, whether existing refinery complexes or fertilizer plants, where they can utilize some of the utility and other transport infrastructure to then reduce the initial capital outlay and hence reduce the overall ammonia price. That has worked out really well in many instances. And I would say there are other tactics as well that people have followed, and especially when you've been talking about the offtake. Offtake is for export market, then the transmission and again export cost adds to the economics. But if you have the localized demand especially, then that helps as well. So let's say again, a refinery, fertilizer, or any other industrial complexes which are utilizing hydrogen, if you utilize the hydrogen straight away into those complexes, then the project becomes a lot more viable. So integration with the existing assets, facilities, and utilizing existing infrastructure is probably the best way of making these projects work, in my view.
No, thank you for that. And I want to ask about real projects that we have seen happen when it comes to green ammonia. But before I go to that, maybe Andrew, so you're an expert in methane and low carbon fuel. How do you see the competition between these various low carbon gaseous fuels playing out?
So as any company would, when governments got all excited about this infinite green fuel, hydrogen, we had to analyze what is likely to happen and what is our position vis-a-vis the alternative. Meaning we were fully focused on biomethane as a renewable gas, and now there is hydrogen. So we looked at it in detail, and we came to the conclusion that there is probably more hype than practical use in the short term. However, we still believe that hydrogen has a role, but it isn't to do things that are much easier, cheaper than other ways. For example, we were involved in a project where we sent our biomethane to convert it through a fuel cell to hydrogen for cars. I personally drive a few Teslas, and I've never been a big fan of switching those cars to hydrogen. I think it's a misuse of energy. And so this project was not a huge success. The fundamental issue is that if you use hydrogen, you are going to spend for the same amount of energy a minimum twice as much. And when I say minimum, I'm talking 3 kilograms, which is the future price of hydrogen, than what you can get biomethane. And then when you have hydrogen for general use, you still have to have adaptation. You know, everything that, whether it's the distribution, the storage, or the use in engines, or steel, or whatever you're gonna do, it's a little different, and it's relatively low density fuel. So on the other hand, with biomethane, distribution is already there, all the equipment is already there, so the adaptation is essentially zero. You can just put it in the grid. So when you look at that, and you look at the cost difference, you have to ask, why would we want to change to hydrogen? Why not, if you want green energy, just create more of what makes sense? So that could be partial because that's what my company does. But I'm trying to be as logical, as systematic as I can be. We have, in my view, hydrogen is a great fuel, and all this work is extremely useful. I'm not trying to belittle that, but we don't want to use it badly. We want to use it where only hydrogen will do. So if you look at applications such as green ammonia, if you want green ammonia, you have to have hydrogen. The most successful project that I've been involved in is an even more interesting one where we actually capture carbon. One of our plants in Denmark, a large plant, puts out carbon dioxide as a waste. Because when you make biomethane, you actually create a carbon dioxide stream and a methane stream. This waste product that would otherwise go to the atmosphere is now captured carbon. It is sent to European Energy at Kassel, Denmark. And in Denmark, by the way, most of the power is renewable already. But this particular company has a huge solar plant, so they can easily use that to make hydrogen. They make hydrogen, they take our CO2, convert it to methanol, and it becomes a fuel, a liquid fuel for transportation, like liquid ammonia. So if you're looking at, there's plenty of need for hydrogen. We need to replace, if we want to make an impact, the right place to start with hydrogen is to replace the hydrogen we use now. And there is 100 million tons of gray or black hydrogen currently that should be replaced by renewable hydrogen.
Thanks, Andrew, for that. So hydrogen has its role, but it may not be a solution for everything. And figuring out where it makes sense is quite important for the system to be efficient and for wastage to be minimized. Right, so going back to applications, right? Applications of real projects that we've seen happening around developments of low carbon hydrogen. Ken, Black and Veatch have been involved in some very interesting projects. Would you like to share a few that has come to life that you've been involved in terms of hydrogen projects around the world?
Yeah, thanks for that, Wenbin. And I'd like to offer a couple examples, one of which that KBR actually was the EPC, construction and commissioning of the plant. And also to contextualize that in what Andrew said and what Nikunj said as well around the logic around making hydrogen where hydrogen is needed and making hydrogen where there are co-located structural advantages which drive down the cost of the produced hydrogen or the derivative, like ammonia. So let me start with the example of KBR's recently commissioned ACES-2 project in Utah. This is North America's largest green hydrogen hub project. It comprises 220 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity, and it takes on clean green energy from the surrounding solar and wind resources. But what makes it interesting and actually commissioned, going past FID, one of the few FID projects at scale, is that, number one criteria, you have access to competitively priced green energy, number one. Number two, it's co-located in a place where there are salt caverns that are or can be used for hydrogen storage. So already you have an advantage around storage. The third criteria is they are using that clean hydrogen as a potential blend into hydrogen gas-ready turbines supplied by Mitsubishi. So effectively, this entire ecosystem, this value chain basically has at its heart a potential arbitrage cost between the cost of renewables versus the cost of incumbent natural gas that's used to fire the gas turbines to generate power. Okay? So effectively, what you're doing there is you have an option around switching between natural gas and green energy after it's been made into green hydrogen. But the key thing that actually led it to being commissioned finally was that it had an off-taker. Many hydrogen, green or low carbon projects don't get past FID or even get past the feed stage unless you have an identified off-taker, i.e. a willing buyer, right? In this case, the off-taker of the ultimate power was California, right? From the Intermountain Power Agency that sells the power to California, a willing buyer, an off-taker. So it's a rare but happy coincidence of these key criteria that makes green hydrogen projects ultimately commercially viable and can stand up. It is challenging, right, in the way we're looking at the industry now. I agree that there's been a lot of hype and froth, but I think over the next few years, we'll probably see quality and viability rise to the surface and all the chaff and all the guff gets kicked out because it doesn't get any funding for it. And the message I want to leave, at least is this one message, is that there are some projects out there which can actually be viable, but you've got to be pretty disciplined about meeting these criteria, and particularly about identifying a willing and long-term off-taker for the green hydrogen. And on the second point around the co-location of facilities, it is always better if you can find a use in situ for the produced hydrogen, whether it's an ammonia plant or whether it's Andrew's example of Denmark where you have it being converted into methanol and you already had a local source of biogenic carbon dioxide. Wonderful, because that cuts out the complexity around long-range transport of hydrogen, which as many of you I'm sure know, very difficult to transport. If you can have that happy confluence of all of these factors, then you might have a good chance to actually make the project fly. So like I said, Black & Veatch, we've done 200 fells, and the ACES one in Utah is the first for us, by the way. We've commissioned it to actually make this project happen and actually produce that green hydrogen for our client.
Ken, thanks. That's interesting. Just a clarification, I'm sure the audience will have this question. How much subsidies does this project has from the government?
There was no direct subsidy for this, right? But we did help IPA and the consortium with Chevron to basically get some help from the DOE in the initial phases for funding, right? Right.
That's good to hear. So it's not a significant direct subsidies. And how about offtake price? Is that at the market rates, or is that at a premium to the market rates as substantial to make that project work? Given offtake is a government, is from the Western part.
Yeah, I can't give you the rates, obviously, of that. But remember, the idea here is basically a cost arbitrage, right? So effectively, you choose to make the power when you compare the natural gas price that you're pumping into the dual fuel gas turbine, or when it makes sense, you use the green hydrogen instead to make the power, and then you sell it on to the Californians who are willing to pay that premium price for it.
That's very interesting. It will be quite interesting to find similar parallels or situations across APAC as well. Onishi-san, how about from ITOCHU? Are there any good examples that you would glad to share around the developments that's moving a bit quicker, a bit more exciting around this region closer to where we are?
Sorry, you ask what aspect? Sorry.
Yeah, have you seen any projects, green hydrogen, ammonia projects that are developing well in APAC, and any examples that you can share with the audience?
So you ask us our production project in Indonesia, or to what aspect? So sorry about that.
APAC.
Yeah. So in APAC, as I mentioned, we would like to create green ammonia in Indonesia. So you're asking me to deep into this project, or?
Yeah. So we heard about that project that ITOCHU is developing earlier in your introduction. are there a bit more about what has been key to driving that project forward in your view?
Understand. Thank you very much. So in any case, I myself or my team came from a marine department. So the first step is we create ammonia fueled vessel. And once it's developed, we would like to own the vessel by ourselves. But in any case, we need a fuel that is ammonia. So we need a bunkering hub, and we focus on Singapore as the first ammonia bunkering hub. And of course, we need a clean ammonia as well. So we focusing on Indonesian green ammonia production. And this is very good for us because currently, unfortunately, in Singapore, there is no storage tank for ammonia. So, but as I mentioned, we already made a FID for ammonia bunker vessel. Then if we can find a clean ammonia nearby, near Singapore, then we can transport such ammonia by bunker vessel and for usage of the marine fuel. And I mentioned this, Pupuk Indonesia already creating, making ammonia, that is a gray ammonia, but they have a surplus capacity to produce more. So we and Pupuk and Toyo Engineering is now considering to install electrolyzer, not big scale, but a small scale of electrolyzer in the location Pupuk Iskandar Muda that is located in Aceh. And then we would like to introduce renewable energy from PLN, as Ricky-san just made a presentation, renewable energy to create green hydrogen and put this green hydrogen into Pupuk's synthetic plant. Then we would like to offtake green ammonia from Pupuk for Singapore bunkering purpose. That is the smallest size we can start. And then, yeah, thanks to Japanese government, we got a Japanese governmental grant called GS, Global South Grant, for this project. So that is accelerator for our project. So once we have clean ammonia, we expect or we hope to make a COD in 2027 or 8. Then we have a bunker vessel in September 2027. And if we have a customer, I mean ammonia fueled vessel in 2027, we can start this journey with ammonia as marine fuel.
Great. So looking forward for that for 2028 COD of green ammonia.
We hope so. And we would like to start bunkering demonstration here in Singapore. That is strongly supported by MPA.
Good. So that's a lovely examples around looking at existing demand, right? So ammonia production supply chain from Pupuk, identifying existing facilities that have spare production capacity that can be utilized, and setting up co-located green ammonia production facility, and also bite size as well, like small facilities. And I assume that there's no long-term offtake given the size is bite size, and that can be taken in view.
Size is around 50 KTPA of green ammonia production. That is equivalent for covering 2 to 3 ammonia filled vessel if the vessel going for Australian round or carry iron ore.
Right. And that's interesting because it's quite a contrast to what Ken shared around offtake, right? Offtake has always been a bottleneck, right? Long-term offtake buyers is a very important ingredient for financiers, but only to big projects, right? So we're seeing small projects actually able to move ahead with or without like signed long-term offtake. So that's a very key feature that I think is emerging, right, in terms of different approach to developing a project and taking it to COD.
Yeah. And also, as you may know, 17th October, IMO just postponed to adoption of the midterm measures. Then we have to reconsider our plan is correct or not. Then it's a good point because we are collaborating with Pupuk. They produce gray ammonia currently. Then we can add on green ammonia. Then if we can make a blending with green and gray, we can adjust CI value, carbon intensity value, as customer required for us, and together with the pricing.
So you'll probably lead the price discovery process.
That's also future discussion. I cannot decide now.
Good. Okay, right. So when we think about scaling up, green hydrogen production is a very complex supply chain, value chain from production, storage, and then end use through various forms, and cross-border nature comes in as well in terms of partnerships. Looking forward, based on everything we've learned, and looking forward for the next 5, 10 years, what alignment, so collaboration, alignment, so coming to partnerships, so questions around partnerships and how Asia can take leadership to shape the landscape going forward. Nikunj, where do you see our very important alignment, collaboration that countries or corporates around the region will need to work together to de-bottleneck in order to allow the continued development and scale up of hydrogen developments?
Yeah, thank you. There are 4 areas I would say. Let me start first with the transition, because when we talk about transition is from going from gray to blue to green, right? And if we follow that pattern, then there is a good way that we can build infrastructure in the fashion that's needed to kind of develop the green hydrogen projects. Taking a perfect example of EVs. EVs being rolled out irrespective of where the electricity comes from, and you see the uptake of EVs have globally increased, right? Now it's an opportunity when we have the renewable energy coming into the grids, automatically all the vehicles utilizing the clean energy. So allowing the hydrogen to grow with blue, gray, and a green as a mix would be the right thing, and eventually making sure that we move towards the greener part of the hydrogen value chain. That would be great, because at the end of the day, it's a low carbon hydrogen. We don't need to be fixated with the green alone. That's the first area where, as a region, we need to get the alignment. The second most important piece, as I talked about earlier, is the power, because we consume a lot of power in producing hydrogen. And as a region, ASEAN, of course, is working on the ASEAN grid projects and establishing the right infrastructure. So putting that in a place on a priority would enable lots of projects to be unlocked with power being available to large projects. Third aspect, I would say, and for especially economies, Singapore's and many other South Asian economies, where space is a constraint, especially on the port side and other areas. So establishing new infrastructure through different hydrogen vectors, whether it's an ammonia, whether it's a methanol, MCH, or anything else, means running parallel infrastructure in the constrained space, which is not always logical and practical. So choosing a specific vector or 1 or 2 vectors would allow kind of streamlining the choices, and again, set the direction for the region as a whole to develop the specific part of the hydrogen value chain, which is essential. And the last and important part from my perspective is the regulatory aspects and a certification part, especially if the regions are looking at hydrogen consumption within the region itself, less of a challenge. But if any of the hydrogen is going to be exported, especially in the EU economies, then alignment of EU requirements or other exporting country requirements is extremely essential. So certification part, legislation part, regulatory aspect needs to be aligned. And those 2 countries or region needs to align on those very specific aspects. So they need to collaborate on those parts. Then the hydrogen, of course, flourishes. Okay.
Yeah. So lots of areas of alignment.
Absolutely.
That I'm hearing. And Andrew, from your experience in this gaseous form and also hydrogen, anything else to add?
Well, I think in terms of developing a project, whatever the project is, the number 1 thing is an offtake. Then once you have an offtake, it's bankable as long as your costs are in line with the offtake. To get the cost in line, let's say it's a hydrogen project. To me, what makes projects is if you have low cost of power. So anyone, like in our case in this project I talked about in Denmark, having a major solar energy company with a plant right next door that could add a significant additional volume at marginal cost to the project. And then, of course, the electrolyzers and reducing those costs. But ultimately, all of that is pretty simple engineering. And you do need partnerships, but everything depends on the offtake. The project in Utah, any project we're talking about, without an offtake, it never gets going. And so somebody has to pay the premium. And in the particular case in Denmark, the premium was paid by Merckx, who wanted to reduce their carbon footprint in transportation. And this will be a driver for many of these projects.
Just one conscious of time and wanted to open the questions to the floor. Are there any questions? Or, yeah, maybe you can. How do we get it? You can introduce yourself and then the questions. We'll take 1 or 2 questions.
Thanks, Thomas. Rick Parker from A-Star here in Singapore. Totally agree with Andrew's statement earlier on that only use hydrogen when it's the best thing or the only thing you can use. I was therefore rather confused by Kenneth's discussion of making hydrogen and then using it in a gas turbine. If I make hydrogen using electricity, it takes about 50 kilowatt hours to make 1 kilogram of hydrogen. If I burn it in a gas turbine, I make at most 20 kilowatt hours if it's a combined cycle. So it just doesn't add up for me.
Yes, the example I was asked to give was an actual project that had gone to commissioning. And unfortunately, that's the one that my company built for IPA. And I do sense the irony that I gave the example immediately after Andrew's comment. And by the way, I do also agree that you should use the hydrogen molecule where the hydrogen molecule is needed first, as opposed to an energy. So let me put that on record. But the Utah project, again, it stacks up because it's basically a cost arbitrage play, right? And when you have supply of very cheap green energy, which even after conversion and obviously the losses of efficiency, it still makes sense, then you might want to say use that instead of paying for natural gas at a particular price point. And I think that's an important takeaway because many people knock hydrogen, green or low carbon versions, because they always say, oh, there's an efficiency penalty because of physics. Absolutely right. But the point I think that tends to be missed is your alternative source and cost of energy in location in question. And why I say that is because if you have a preponderance of fossil fuel in that location, why the hell would you go to green hydrogen unless you had a rabid ESG agenda that you had to fulfill, right? Why would you do that? Because the cost argument will win hands down every single time. However, if you're in a location which actually you don't have that resource, and your next best alternative is solar or wind or biomass for that matter, and if you're a country that is also having one eye on energy independence and security, is it only the cost, is it only the absolute cost question, or do you also take into account, and I think probably Ricky just now was kind of hinting at it as well, in Indonesia, that I would focus on trying to monetize my domestic resources of energy, clean or not, right? So put the ESG considerations aside, or say take Singapore, for example. Singapore has basically minuscule domestic renewable energy sources, right? What can it use? So my appeal every time I come here is that you're right, green hydrogen is very expensive to use, but please don't forget that it's a relative cost comparison of the end user in that location. Because if my next best alternative is to generate power on an island with very expensive diesel transported there, maybe it still makes sense for me to make green hydrogen where I need the hydrogen molecule in situ. That's just my sort of like nuanced perspective that I like to offer.
I would add one more thing, Ken, to what you said. I think energy security and all the points that you say is spot on. The biggest challenge as well for the renewable energy is the intermittency. When you put the renewable energy into the main grid, there are lots of other challenges as to how you handle the intermittency as well. While, of course, if you convert it to hydrogen and put in the hydrogen for the power generation, you can maintain the base load as you want, and you can regulate the base load. So the advantage, of course, when your grid is not suitable for maintaining, handling the intermittency, then sometimes you want to consider, especially when you have a stable peak demands in the region, then you probably want to consider using the hydrogen into the power generation as well. So yeah, it's in a high level, what you said is absolutely right. Doesn't make sense from energy efficiency point of view, but there are other instances where it can work.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree that, for example, light load, low range mobility, an electric vehicle would be a much better proposition than a fuel cell vehicle, right? Simply because of the complexity and the end user cost. But where you still need the hydrogen molecule, I think I still think it's a case for it. Yeah.
And just to go into that specific example that Ken was talking about, why it sort of makes sense, and one of the key difference, and this is why hydrogen is so interesting, because hydrogen is such a versatile, what do you call that, molecules? It can be energy in some contexts, and it's a feedstock in others, it's a fertilizer in others. So hydrogen is quite interesting because of the versatility of how versatile it is in various forms and various use. But in that context of that being used in the power plant, right, not generally the most efficient use of hydrogen, but in that context, quite interesting because hydrogen was produced in gas form, it is stored in gas form, in salt cavern.
In salt caverns, yeah.
It's in gas form, so no conversion process, no loss of energy. Right. So it's produced in gas form, stored in gas form, burned in gas form. So literally produced and stored, and then you're just waiting for the arbitrage to happen, right? When gas price spikes, and it does spike. So, and that's why you use, when you have abundant renewables, you're basically converting sun, so wind, or hydro, into a storable gas form underground, and then you use it whenever the commodity price spikes, right? So it's a genius in identifying application of hydrogen in that specific instance. Yeah. And because it's so complex, there's no one product that will fit all solutions. And this is why hydrogen it's very important to study the exact location, right? It's a cost comparison, identifying existing facility, existing use of hydrogen or potential use of hydrogen, and figure out the economics, right? And this is why hydrogen is so complex, so difficult, and yet it's so interesting because it's abundant, and there's various applications across mobility, industries, and power generation sectors.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not blessed with salt caverns everywhere, right? Unfortunately, it's not that you just poke a stick and you'll find a salt cavern. But I just want to share two more other projects that we have provided feeds for, Whiteley and Albury in the UK, in the Hull region. Some of you who are from the UK will know that. The feeds are completed, but again, storage is provided through salt caverns available by taking relatively cheap North Sea wind energy to make the hydrogen. Will the economics stack up? Well, that's the next phase, and we'll see whether ultimately, or we might need UK government subsidy support to make it happen. So these are examples where even when you have a salt cavern located literally underground, it might not make it, right? So like I said, just watch this space. It's still evolving. And I think the financial discipline of returns on projects will ultimately decide whether some of these projects go ahead or not.
Thank you, Kent. Any other questions from the floor? No? Any more questions? Yeah, if not, maybe one line each from the panelists to wrap up. What you would like to see happening in the green hydrogen space. Should we start with Andrew?
Would you mind if I spoke a little more generally for a second?
Please.
I'll be short. So if engineers ran the world, which is not instead of oil companies, I would start rationally and replace all electricity as soon as possible with wind and solar and figure out storage. Once that's done, we can go for maybe 25% of the world's energy needs. There's 75% fossil fuel right now. And we need to start increasing the portion that's electrical, like cars. That's the simplest by far. And then we need to look, again, as an engineer, rationally, for the lowest cost way to reduce the carbon that goes into the atmosphere, rather than jump on horses. And when you do that, you will find place for all these different forms of energy. Like some of the examples here, there are locations, there are particular uses like ship transportation, where you will need hydrogen. You will need a lot more gaseous fuel, but one that's easy to use. That's why we're in biomethane, and so on and so forth. All I'm really hoping for, that someday government will be rational rather than influenced by lobbyists.
Thanks. Kenneth?
My one line, if you take away basically, is that when you look at these opportunities, again, please try to have a balanced perspective around the use case in the particular location, because that's actually what is considered at the project level, not at a high theoretical level, right? So, as I said, there's some cases which can fly, but you need to have a happy marriage of these key criteria, from the offtake all the way to the local feedstock availability of either your green electrons and or a nice co-location of the product that you're actually trying to use already. So you save a lot of capex upfront with that project.
Onishi-san?
Yeah, thank you very much. And for myself, yes, today is very interesting because I had many topics and many views from great panelists today. And I myself, as I mentioned, I came from international shipping sector. That is a bit unique. International shipping and international commercial aviation is outside the Paris Agreement. And if we ask government to support this shipping sector, yeah, okay, yeah, we can consider, but let's say we are Japanese party, so we ask Japanese government, but why we have to support international shipping? Because that came from Japanese tax. And this is for Japanese like NDCs. Then it's very hard to receive directly from governmental support. This is a sector. And also, yeah, hydrogen is a dreaming fuel. Hydrogen is an energy source. But we cannot carry hydrogen as it is, as a liquefied state. We need minus 263 degrees C. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Of course, it's a dreaming. Maybe 10 years later, 20 years later, maybe we can do it. But in any case, for now, we need to convert into ammonia or methanol or biofuels or something like that. So that is another unique point. Again, but we are now focusing on ammonia and to create entire supply chain from ammonia field vessel, ammonia bunkering, and ammonia creation, production. So we think supply chain is still key. If we have production only, then don't use. If we have bunkering only, that also not usage. And of course, we need all sector and step by step. So yeah, I would like to leave my comment is, yeah, entire supply chain creation is the key for decarbonization. And for this purpose, we need to collaborate with each other. We, ITOCHU, cannot do everything by ourselves. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Nikunj, last lines. Yeah, you have the last word.
Yeah. So from a hydrogen perspective, I would say one thing, but it's a green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, or e-fuels in general. Everything requires hydrogen. I've heard a lot of things about, oh, hydrogen has been hyped, hydrogen is going to disappear. But I think if we have to truly decarbonize, hydrogen is going to stay and hydrogen is going to grow. What is important, of course, is we set our expect in such a way that is a progressive growth. So far, what we have seen is a floodgate approach that we have a set deadlines and everyone's rushing to that deadlines. And then nobody's going past the gate. Everything's stuck at the gate. So if we kind of set the realistic timeline that allows the supply chain to grow, infrastructure to grow, things would eventually come into place. And hydrogen is at that situation right now. The hype has come to the trough, and now what we see is the real project moving past the trough and getting the progress. So I would say I'm optimistic when it comes to hydrogen. Hydrogen will play a major role in decarbonizing many sectors and industries across the world.
Well, lovely ending notes. But thank you very much for the panelists. Please join me to thank the panelists. Thank you.
Many thanks to our panel. If I can ask you all to step forward for a photograph, please. Thank you all, gentlemen. I'm conscious that we've gone over by a few minutes, but I do want to take a minute to just bring proceedings to a close. We've heard from experts throughout the hydrogen field, working across Asia Pacific. And I think we've acknowledged that there are headwinds that the industry is facing, and that perhaps we've moved past the period of hype that we were in a few years ago. But I think what today's really shown is that there are successes out there that we can look to and learn from. And that's what we must take forward in the conversations over the next few days. This is now the end of the Green Hydrogen track. Very much like to thank you all for your attendance, for your participation in today's session. Before we go, I'd like to ask you to share feedback on today and the rest of the sessions this week via the ACES app. If you open the app, you will find a survey icon. Do share your thoughts and suggestions on our program. This is the end of the Green Hydrogen track, but it's not the end of ACES, and the program continues tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you at those events. On behalf of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, thanks for joining us today, and look forward to speaking again soon.